As two rival magicians become increasingly desperate to outdo each other, they will stop at nothing to uncover each other's secrets and pull off the ultimate illusion. My favorite trick? Hide the pickle, if you know what I mean. So we start out in some sort of wasteland and a voice comes out of nowhere saying things. Next, we're in what looks to be an aviary where an old man is showing a young girl a magic trick with a bird in a cage. At the same time, a magic trick is being performed in a theater, both while the narrator is walking us through the 3 acts in a magic show. The 3rd act is called The Prestige, which is the name of the movie. The theater magician makes himself disappear through a lightning thing, but he actually just drops inside a cage filled with water. It appears that his 3rd act is supposed to be him reappearing somewhere in the theater, but the person outside the cage looks more content watching the magician drown. Now we're in a courtroom, and the man who watched the magician drown, Borden, is in chains with the old man magician as witness. Apparently, old man magician, Cutter, is an engineer and he worked with the now dead magician to design the stuff he used to perform. Cutter is accusing Borden of putting the tank of water where it shouldn't have been, leading to the magician's death. But the defense lawyer asks him to explain the trick, so that the court can ascertain what should or shouldn't have been where. Cutter refuses though, because, as you know, a magician never reveals his tricks. The judge insists, so the magician has to make this exception. Yeah, seriously, come on, man. Next, we see someone being escorted into prison to see Borden, so they must have found him guilty of murder. The visitor is here, on behalf of Lord Caldlow, as his solicitor, to convince Borden to sell him his greatest trick, the transported man. Borden initially refuses, but the solicitor, Owens, is prepared for that. As Borden is about to leave, Owens quickly reminds him that his daughter would be an orphan once he is executed. Borden mentioned that she'll be taken care of by his partner, Fallon, but Owens says that the court ordered for her to be removed from his house. So he offers for Borden to sell his precious trick to Lord Caldlow in exchange for the Lord adopting his daughter. Borden is really considering the deal now, even accepting Owens' card and a diary that he says belonged to Angier, the dead magician. Quite the name. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. Apparently, Angier documented the time he spent trying to find out Borden's trick in that diary, and was eventually able to replicate said trick, so well that the paper said it was better than the original. Borden doesn't like this, of course, but he goes through the diary, and we're taken back in time to when the experiences that Angier documented in his diary were actually happening. We see Angier just arrive at Colorado Springs, and is so shocked that the whole town has electricity. This is happening in the 1890s though, so it's understandable. Anyway, Angier is driven to a hotel, where he plans to stay for as long as it takes. He tells the front deskman that he would need a coach to take him to the mountain the next day, but the front desk mentions that the peak is closed for scientific experimentation. Angier says that's exactly why he's there. That's enough for him to get the coach the next day apparently, but the coach driver refuses to take him all the way. So Angier hikes it the rest of the way, gets to a gate and tries to push it open, but is shocked, literally and figuratively. A man comes shouting from inside about how shocked he is that newspaper writers can't read. He's got that Glock on him, but he quickly puts it down when he realizes who is before him. Apparently the new guy, Ali, is a fanboy, but he manages to rein in his excitement and not allow Angier to see Tesla as he requested, even after Angier mentioned that he was loaded, with money, not bullets. Angier mentions that he'll be staying indefinitely at the hotel, and goes back to said hotel. Next, we see him making an entry into his journal, which takes us back in time to when Angier and Borden were young, wide-eyed magic lovers attending a magic show. Separately though, they both get picked to participate in the magic show by tying up a young woman, and Angier is really into it. Relatable. On the sidelines is Cutter with an axe and a stopwatch on the ready. The routine is successful, but next we see Borden complaining about how predictable and boring the magician is. Oh, apparently, Angier and Borden are not random magic watchers. They're part of a kind of magic group, including the lady that was tied up, and Cutter looks to be their leader. Borden is really not happy about the magician's tired old routine, and insists that a real magician should be doing something new, but the others just laugh at him. Cutter asks him whether he has a magic trick that'll wow everyone, and he says he does, but no one else can do it but him. Cutter then tells him about a Chinese man who's really good at magic, being chilling. He tells Borden and Angier to go to one of the guy's shows and try to figure out how he does his tricks. Any of them who does will get 10 minutes on stage with a top theatrical agent from London. Next, they're talking about rope tying techniques. Apparently, Borden didn't tie it tight enough, but the technique that he's suggesting as an alternative would be too tight. Borden continues to stew and leaves, and Angier says something about not trusting him. The lady who was tied up, who happens to be Angier's wife, no wonder he was so into tying her up, says Borden is alright though. Borden and Angier go to the Chinese man show, and Borden seems a lot happier. After the show, Borden is saying something about self-sacrifice that neither Angier nor the audience seems to fully understand. Angier goes home and tries to replicate the trick, but he's sidetracked by his wife, who, among other things, suggests a stage name for him, the Great Danton, whatever that means. And we're transported forward where we see Angier documenting his experiences in his diary. He mentions that Borden acts as if only he could understand the true nature of magic, and we're taken even further forward to Borden reading that part in Angier's diary, and not looking really pleased. Now we're back to the past, and Borden is locking eyes with a woman in the audience, while the magician that he's assisting makes a bird and its cage disappear. A child in the audience is not impressed. Even after he makes the bird reappear, Borden decides to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, walking over to the child, who just so happens to be sitting with the woman he was locking eyes with, to convince him that the bird is still alive. The smart boy asks where the bird's brother is. Borden speaks to the lady, telling her that her son is smart, but she tells him that he's her nephew. Borden almost grins from ear to ear. Next, Borden goes to the room to throw out the dead bird, and then comes back out to perform a coin trick on the smart kid, while also giving him some sage words of wisdom. By the next scene, Borden and the lady have been on a date already and are now on a first name basis. Borden leaves the lady at the door and walks away, but then she enters her room and sees him inside already, and she's laughing. Anyway, we're taken back, or forward, whatever, to Borden in prison. But next we see two men, the judge and Cutter, walk up to a huge machine. We find out that the machine belonged to Angier, but was built by someone that Cutter calls a wizard. The judge mentions that the machine will be sold to Lord Caldlow, but Cutter says that the machine is too dangerous and should not be sold. He mentions that the machine does real dangerous stuff, not tricks, but the judge doesn't believe him. They move to the water tank in which Angier died, and we find out that the lock was switched for a real one, which was why Angier couldn't escape. And in the next scene, we find out that the water tank was significant to both Borden and Angier, because Angier's wife died in a water tank while performing a trick, because she couldn't loosen the knot that Borden tied on her hands. Borden attends the burial, and Angier asks him which knot he tied. Borden claims he doesn't know, and then leaves. Next, we see Borden is now in some sort of partnership with Fallon, and they just got their first gig. Meanwhile, his girlfriend is pregnant, and they celebrate by performing a bullet catch trick. She asks him to tell her how he did it, and although he initially refuses, he eventually does. He even tells her how the trick can be sabotaged with fatal results. Oh well. He tells her that he loves her, but she says that sometimes he doesn't mean it, and today is one of those days. Next, we see Angier playing with a bullet. Could it be? We're immediately taken to a pub where Borden is performing some basic tricks and is being booed by the audience. They immediately change their tune when he pulls out the gun, though, going from bored out of their minds to scared for their lives, too excited to pull a trigger on someone in a matter of seconds. Someone gets chosen from the audience to pull the trigger, and the audience is probably as shocked as Borden when we find out that Angier is that someone that was chosen. I mean, this is Borden's bullet catch debut. His wife? Angier asks Borden which knot he tied. Borden continues to say that he doesn't even know with the gun pointed at his chest. As that is happening, Fallon is able to distract Angier so that when the gun goes off, the bullet shaves off some of Borden's fingers instead of his whole life. This actually amuses the audience. Next, we see Angier in the future, reading Borden's diary this time around, and Borden still maintains in the diary that he can't remember what kind of knot he tied, which angers Angier. Why so angy? Then we're taken even further into the future where Borden is in prison reading Angier's diary, where he wrote about reading Borden's diary. We're taken back into the past, and Borden's baby is here already, but his fingers are still messed up, and they can't afford to go to the doctor for it. He still insists on doing magic though, even though his trick options are limited now. Angier's at a bar and he finds a card at the bottom of his glass. He recognizes it as a message and looks around to find Cutter. Cutter has come to recruit him. They hire a female assistant, Olivia, and Cutter teaches Angier all the tricks he needs to perform, including how to make a dove disappear without killing it. Angier almost successfully performs his first show. The whole thing would have been a success if it wasn't for the meddling Borden. Borden is the only one that completely succeeded that night, as he managed to weasel his way into the audience and sabotage Angier's final act, the bird disappearance, injuring a member of the audience in the process. As a result, the theater refuses to allow Angier to perform the other shows he planned for the week. Cutter starts to think of alternatives, and mentions that Angier could change his stage name, but he refuses to change the name because it's the name his wife suggested back then. Remember the time when Angier was trying to have a minute with Tesla? Yep, we're back in that time now. This time around, Angier is alone in the hotel's restaurant when he's approached by his fanboy, Ali. But Ali doesn't seem very fanboy-y. Angier tells him that he wants Tesla to build him the machine that he built for a rival, and Ali tells him to finish his drink and they could go see something. Ali had initially mentioned that the work he did for Tesla was secret, so Angier points that out, but he says that no one would believe a magician. They go somewhere and Ali reveals that the reason the whole town is lit up is because Tesla agreed to do that in exchange for being able to use the generator whenever he wanted. He also mentions that they do all their tests when the town is asleep because Tesla doesn't want anyone scared. And thanks to movie magic, the whole place lights up just as he finishes talking. The whole place is dotted with these huge bulbs which are now lit up, but there are no wires and the generator is really far away. Angier correctly concludes that this has to be magic, real magic. Now we see Angier at an exhibition where sparks of electricity are flying on the stage. It looks similar to what he used for his trick at the beginning of the movie, but Tesla's written on the stage. His fanboy is seen on stage trying to convince the audience that the device is safe, and Thomas Edison is just trying to smear Tesla's name, but someone else on the stage doesn't agree. The lightning thing looks just about ready to blow, and everybody rushes to leave the room. Angier looks reluctant to leave though, but as everybody moves, we see that Borden is there for the exhibition as well. Angier spots and tails him, which is how he finds out that Borden is married with a kid. Next we see Angier reading Borden's diary where he discovers that, while Borden might have seemed happy because of his family, it wasn't always. And then we see Borden in prison reading Angier's thoughts on what he just read from Borden's diary. Fallon brings Borden's daughter to see him in prison, and she does not look happy. It looks like Borden has agreed to sell his greatest trick to Lord Caldlow because he hands over the business card to Fallon. When he leaves, Borden treats his fellow inmates to a performance with one of the Warnens as a scapegoat. Meanwhile, it's February 8, 1899, and Angier finally gets an audience with Tesla. Tesla comes out of sparks of electricity and is charged enough to power a huge light bulb. They sit to eat breakfast, and then Angier makes his proposition, acknowledging that what he wants is impossible. Tesla refutes that though, saying that what he wants is simply expensive. You know, like a Tesla. Thanks, Elon. But Tesla asks Angier whether he has considered the cost of owning such a machine, not the price. Then he tells Angier that he's obsessed and he'll be better forgetting about the machine. He's speaking from experience, so he's not surprised when Angier refuses to go home. Next, we see Angier preparing to go out and exert revenge on Borden for spoiling his final act. But Cutter thinks it'll be better to let things lie, according to Olivia. Angier's not okay with that idea, especially because Borden has all that he could ever want, a family and a magic career, while he had nothing. Olivia then helps him with with his disguise. Next, we see Angier enter the room where Borden is performing, and Borden calls out for a volunteer. But when it's the next scene and Angier is home taking off his disguise, while the lady is asking what happened, apparently, Borden had debuted an awesome magic trick, the transported man, and nobody could figure out how it was done. Well, Cutter believes that Borden must have used a double, but Angier thinks that he must have done something more complex than that. They want to find a way for Angier to use the trick though, capitalizing on the fact that Borden is not a good showman. Whether or not Borden is a good showman, people seem to love the act because he can now afford to buy a house. He takes his wife and daughter to go see the house, and his wife is shocked. She says she asked him about it the other day, but he says that she caught him in the wrong mood. Next, we see that Olivia has managed to find a double for Angier, who thinks himself a funny man. Angier and Olivia practice the routine in the meantime, and there's romance in the air. But before things can get hot and heavy, the double arrives to show how much he has learned in 1 month. The double, Root, is now really good at playing Angier, even drunk. In fact, he's so good he never wants to stop. Anyway, they debut the trick, calling it the new transported man, and the double decides to use the opportunity to take some liberties. The audience really loves the trick though, and that's all that matters. Or so you think. Angier isn't happy that he didn't get to receive the ovation, even after being appeased by Olivia. He suggests switching with the double before the prestige, but Cutter reminds him that his showmanship is needed for the initial build-up. Olivia tries to console him, but he insists that the trick isn't good enough, and that he needs to find out how Borden does his. So he gets a brilliant idea. He asks Olivia to go and work for Borden as a spy, and then has the nerve to try to kiss her afterwards. We're sent forward in time once again, and Tesla, Angier, and Allie are testing the machine. It doesn't work as it should, so Allie escorts Angier out of the lab. Olivia starts her mission by going over to Borden's workshop. She tells him the version of truth that she and Angier agreed on, but Borden is able to figure out exactly how Angier does his own version of the transported man. Over on the Angier side, Root is drunk and causing trouble and asking for money, while Angier is more concerned with the fact that Borden is performing across the street. Cutter tells Angier that they need to stop doing the transported man, but Angier has tasted too much success to stop. Unfortunately for him, Borden is able to get into Root's head, giving him the opportunity to get onto Angier's stage and steal his audience. Cutter guesses that Olivia might be the reason Borden was able to find Root, so Angier goes over to harass her. He accuses her of clapping with him, and she doesn't refute it, but she does give him Borden's notebook. The notebook, however, is in code. She asks that he return the notebook before Borden's next show the next day, but he refuses, telling her that he'll stage a break-in into Borden's shop so that he thinks he took it. Olivia doesn't look excited. Oh well, it's because she's in love with him, but Angier sympathizes with her. Borden successfully performs the transported man trick and decides to walk home. Angier tails him, and Fallon tails Angier. Angier diverts, and Fallon follows, but he soon realizes that it's a trap as he falls into a box that's sealed shut by Cutter and Angier. Sometime later, Borden and Angier meet somewhere in the rain, but it's a hostage situation. Borden's method for the release of Fallon. Borden writes the code to the notebook, which is also the secret, on a piece of paper and gives it to Angier. Angier then points him to a shallow grave when he asks for Fallon. Angier goes to share the bounty with Cutter, who is in a hospital with his arm in a cast, and we find out that the secret is Tesla, who lives in America. Cutter tries to dissuade him from continuing with his obsession, even saying that he won't continue this with Angier. But as we already know, Angier goes anyway. Meanwhile, Borden doesn't understand that 3 is a crowd because he brings Olivia and Fallon on a date with his wife. Olivia proceeds to call him Freddy in front of his wife, even though his first name is Alfred. The wife eventually asks Fallon to take Olivia home. When they leave, the couple gets into an altercation like couples do. Borden can't just seem to stop performing even when he's not on stage, and his wife is tired of it, so she drinks a lot of angry juice. Now we're back at the hotel in the town where Angier went to look for Tesla. Some guys that work for Thomas Edison are now in the hotel. Anyway, Angier continues to read Borden's diary, and he finds out that Olivia didn't do everything according to plan, and that's because she was annoyed that he'd sent her to Borden as a spy when she was in love with him, Angier. Either that or it was just love at first time for her with Borden. Whatever the reason, she helped Borden with his trick, telling him to show his severed fingers to make the trick more believable. And for some reason, Borden, who has a wife and kid, decided that he was in love with her. Men even talked about needing assurances of fidelity. Anyway, this is where we find out that Angier has been on a wild goose chase all along. Borden didn't have anything to do with Tesla. Tesla was only the key to his coded book, and Olivia giving Angier that book, that was proof of her fidelity to Borden. Go figure. What's worse for Angier is that he had been spending money on a machine that had never been built. Tesla collected the money because his own funding had been cut, so Angier threatens to bring Edison's men from the hotel into the lab. Well, apparently Tesla's not a thief. Science is just hard. They had been trying the machine on Angier's hat, but it never disappeared. Talk more of reappearing. They try with Allie's cat, and it looks like nothing happens either. But as Angier's walking back home, he sees a field of hats with a couple of cats, which is the same scene that we started with. Apparently, the machine just replicates things in a different location. He calls Tesla to take a look, and Tesla tells him that he would need a couple of weeks to fix the machine. Next, we see Borden disappoint his daughter and lie to his wife while she drinks. He tells his wife that he loves her, and she said that he means it this time around, but it just makes the times when he doesn't more difficult. He then gives all his paternal and marital responsibilities to Fallon, while he goes frolicking with his mistress who has a lot of demands. Angier goes back to Tesla to collect his machine, but finds a lab in ruins. Meanwhile, Borden is reading this part of Angier's diary with a smile on his face. Back to Angier, he's checking out of the hotel when the front desk man tells him about the box. Apparently, Tesla was able to finish work on the machine before he left, but he also left behind a message for Angier, part of which was a warning to destroy the machine. He shouldn't have bothered. Angier tests the machine, and then is back to Borden reading the diary in prison, where we find out that Angier is actually not dead. The next day, Borden gives his tricks to Owens, the solicitor. Well, aside from the prestige, he says he'll only give the prestige when his daughter is brought to him. We go back in time to Borden and his wife quarreling because of Sarah, and predictably, Borden insists that Olivia is nothing to him. Their little girl is sat in a corner and Fallon goes to collect select her. The wife asks for complete honesty and Borden gives her that, but she's not excited about it. It's a new day and she's in Borden's workshop reminiscing on times past, right before she self-deletes. Somewhere else, Cutter finds a message at the bottom of his glass, and it leads him to Anger, who wants his help to do one last show. He does his fancy trick in the presence of a theater owner, allowing them to land a gig. Back to Borden, what exactly does his mistress want? His wife is dead and she's asking him to talk about her to her? Now he's telling Olivia that he never loved his wife. Oh well, part of him did, but the part that found Olivia didn't. Come on, even Olivia can see through the BS, and she tells him that it's inhuman to be that cold. The audacity she has to tell him that though. Anyway, she informs him of Anger's last play, and of course he goes. Anger performs his trick and the entire audience goes wild. Borden is angry though, and he pours his anger out on Fallon. Fallon decides to go find out what Anger's trick is, but all he sees is a couple of old men carrying a box out after each performance. Even Cutter doesn't seem to know what Anger's secret is. Borden says that he's done with the feud, but then in Anger's next show, he goes to examine the machine and then finds his way backstage. There he sees an old man sitting by a box of water. Anger drops into the water from the stage. The box locks and he starts drowning. We've seen this before, but something is different. Borden isn't watching Anger die. He's shouting for the key. He even breaks the box, but it's too late. Cutter comes in and immediately blames Borden for Anger's death. We go back to the courtroom and hear that Borden has been found guilty of Anger's murder and has been sentenced to death by hanging. Next, we see Cutter with Owens, and Cutter's trying to buy the machine from Caldlow. Owens says it's not possible, so Cutter asks him whether he can speak directly with Caldlow. The man says it's also not possible, but Cutter can make it possible when he delivers the machine. Now Caldlow is visiting Borden with Borden's daughter, and we find out that Lord Caldlow is actually Anger. Borden is both astonished and pissed and warns Anger not to put his little girl in the middle of all the mess. So Anger points out to him how terrible losing a loved one can be. Anger's about to leave with Borden's daughter, and Borden makes a last-ditch effort to protect his daughter by handing over his secret to Anger. Anger admits that Borden had always been the better magician, but tears the paper where the secret is written because there's no point anymore. He's the only one that matters now. Borden gives his daughter a ball and promises to come for her. He tries to reason with Anger, though, reminding him that he'll soon be hanged, but Anger seems more than fine with that. Anger is back home now, and we see that Cutter is in the house. Cutter realizes that Lord Caldlow is Anger, and he's not happy about it, considering the trauma of seeing Anger dead. Cutter tells him that he came to beg Lord Caldlow to burn the machine, but Anger says that he was going to get rid of it anyway. Cutter is disappointed in Anger, by the way, for how he took things. Now Borden and Fallon are saying their farewells. Borden admits that he should have left Anger alone. He apologizes for a lot of things, and then we hear Fallon speak for the first time. Cutter and a couple of men carry the machine to the theater, at the same time that Borden is being escorted to be hanged elsewhere. Borden tries to get into a prison's guard's head, while Cutter and Anger are getting rid of the machine. Cutter tells Anger something about drowning being agony and nothing like going home, while Borden is being prepared to be clapped. Cutter leaves the theater and leaves Anger behind, while Borden is saying his last words, abracadabra. How cliche. As he says those words, Anger sees a ball bounce towards him, and he's shot in the stomach. Guess who shot him? It's Borden and Fallon. Apparently, they were twins, and were both Borden, and were both Fallon. But while one was in love with Sarah, the wife, the other was in love with Olivia, the assistant. So they made it work, or tried to. We also find out what Anger has been doing to his duplicates. Well, we already kind of knew, but he's been clapping them, and not in the fun way. Borden tells Anger that he did all he did for nothing, but he tells Borden in so many words that he did it for the look on the faces of the audience, and then finally dies. Now we're in Cutter's shop where he's giving Borden's daughter magic lessons. He tells her that the first part of a magic trick is called the pledge. The second part is called the turn, where you basically make something disappear. This isn't where you clap though. You clap when that thing reappears. And as he says this, Borden comes for his daughter. Cutter says that when the magician makes whatever disappear, the audience tries to find out the secret, but we don't try too hard because we actually want to be fooled. And as he says that, we see Anger in a water tank. Moral of the story? Tesla stock be going crazy.